right, we are live. So, Rachel, take it away.
Hi, I'm Rachel Kramer-Bussell. Sorry, I was just unmuting myself. We are here to read from and celebrate and discuss coming soon, Women's Orgasm Erotica, which just came out today from Cleus Press. It is out in print, which you can get from Love Sweet Arrow, and an ebook, and there is an audiobook coming soon. No pun intended, literally. I think we're going to go right into things. Unfortunately, Sally Bend could not be with us, so Claire Cupp has agreed to read. Hi, Claire. I'm going to introduce you in one moment, but I definitely encourage you to read Sally Bend's story, which is called The Size of Love. I encourage you to read all of the stories. There's 20 of them. You're going to get a little sampler of them today. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Questions for me, questions for the authors, and we will do our best to get to them. So I'm going to have each of the authors read a little bit from their story. We're going to go in alphabetical order and then ask some questions. Okay. Claire Cupp, who you can find at Claire, CLAIRECUPP, erotica.com, is a new author and lifelong overthinker. She writes erotica to force herself to have fun. She works in the technology industry and lives with the love of her life, her dog. She publishes free erotic flash fiction when inspiration strikes. And if you want to give her a shout out on Twitter, she is Kinky Claire Cupp. Claire.
Okay, can you hear me, see me? All right, great. So yeah, I'm Claire and I'm new to this, like live streaming, brand new. So I'm a little nervous. I apologize if I, stumble or, just forget what I'm saying completely. That happens sometimes. So my story is love and porn in a retirement home. And I'll just start from the beginning, read a few minutes. Okay, so I am so old that even my grandchildren are grown up. They're married and have their own little children. My children are newly retired. They're traveling and helping with the little ones. I'm living in my cozy retirement community. My husband, Edward, used to live here with me, but he passed away 5 years ago. He was a dutiful man, a good provider, and a devout Catholic. We slept in separate beds, but that wasn't uncommon during our day. It was difficult accepting that I was a single woman after he died, but I've befriended many other single women in this community, like Gail. Gail sits next to me in the back of the classroom. We're in front of the shiny laptops our families gave us, trying to figure out how the darned things work. My family can't always visit me personally, but they share their stories and photos on social media. I'm in this class to learn how to use it. Yesterday, I received an A on my vocabulary exam. For example, a username is a unique name that is used to identify someone on a computer system, computer network, or online account. Spaces are not allowed. Today, I'm creating an account on my family's favorite social media website, or simply site. I open the internet browser and navigate to the site. As I type my first name into the field, I hear Gail giggle. She already knows how to use social media. Maybe something funny came up in her feed. I lean over. She is not on social media. A young woman is letting a man film her while she pleasures him with her mouth. I gasp and hit Gail on the shoulder. I whisper, "What is this disgusting thing you're watching? What if she were your granddaughter?" Gail scrolls down the screen and my stomach knots at a film title. "What kind of stepmother would do that to her stepson? It's immoral." Gail hushes me. "She's not actually his stepmother, Rose. It's pretend. Why on earth would anyone want to pretend that?" "I really have no idea," she whispers, but lets the film play. "Then why are you watching it?" She sighs and smiles toward the ceiling. Could you imagine being wanted by a younger man, someone with unbreakable confidence, someone with smooth muscles and a vigorous libido, someone who is, she intently refocuses on the screen, very good at pleasing a woman? Gail was thoughtful enough to keep the volume off, but I can imagine the sound of the woman shouting while the young man valiantly thrusts his hips between her legs. His buttocks are quite round and firm, and the muscles in his hairless back are tense from his movement. When he sits up, his pelvis turns toward the camera while the woman settles on her hands and knees. I quietly gasp, my goodness. He is quite a large penis, long and thick and firm and shining with the woman's arousal. That's it.
Thank you, Claire. There is a lot more that happens in her story. Okay, I'm going to introduce our next reader. Ella Dawson, who you can find at elladawson.com, is a sex and culture critic whose writing has been published by Elle, MTV, Vox, Women's Health, and more. Her fiction has appeared in short story collections, including Best Women's Erotica of the Year, Volume 2, and Erotic Teasers. And you can find her on Twitter and Instagram at Bros and Pros. Ella?
Hi. So my short story is called Business Trip, and it is, I'm going to start reading from the middle, and it is about an assistant who is seducing her boss on a business trip. Okay. His anxiety about what we are doing bleeds into how he kisses me. When I take his lower lip between my teeth, he keens into my mouth like a helpless animal. This hidden side of him feeds an appetite I didn't know I had before, an appetite to seduce, to take, to control. Even as he pushes me back against the wall, the stucco digging through the fabric of my sensible shift dress, I have him. My fingers twine through his hair, long French tip nails grazing his scalp. A defeated moan vibrates in his chest. I pull my mouth away from his a fraction of an inch, and he lets out a shaky breath across my lips, his forehead propped against mine. When I whisper instructions, I imagine them pouring like smoke down his throat and into his lungs. I want you to kneel, I say. He is rigid and limp all at once, those slender shoulders tensing as his jaw goes slack. I tighten my fingers in his hair, delighted by his hiss. Am I pressuring you? I ask, wry and steel. Wide-eyed, he shakes his head, only to pull his own hair against my firm grasp. Good, I say. He licks his lips, another familiar nervous tell. I consider pouring the whiskey in his mouth and supping it from those bruised lips as it drips down his jaw. Then, just as I wonder if I've pushed him too far, he sinks slowly to his knees on the cold ground. He winces as the concrete grinds through the wool of his trousers. For a moment, he hovers there, his hands fisting in my dress at my hips. Then he looks up at me and waits for further instruction, his eyes black beneath delicate eyelashes. Good boy. The endearment comes from me like it's been lying in wait in my throat. It pleases me as much as it pleases him. I can feel the slickness between my thighs, the desire dripping from me all evening as we circled this dangerous inevitability. The sight of him beneath me, preening under my praise, is almost more than I can bear. My clit pulses. Take off my shoes, I demand next, my voice wavering a notch. He fumbles with the strap of my high heel, his fingers grazing my ankle, and I shiver against the wall. Then he finds the buckle and guides me from the tight pump, cradling the underside of my right foot like it is something delicate. He repeats this with the other shoe, focused and careful. When I am standing flat against the concrete, he traces the seam of my stockings before pulling his touch away, guilty. That's okay, I say, his magnanimous assistant. You're allowed. With a grateful grunt, he cups my calves in his warm hands. I want to feel his touch on my bare skin, and I step 1 foot forward, canting my knee out. This brings him closer to my core, and he licks his lips again, smelling my heat like a dog. Roll down my tights, I tell him. His hands shake as he slides them up my legs and over my thighs. When he finds the waistband, I push my hips away from the wall so that he can guide my pantyhose down. My underwear pulls away with them, and I don't stop him, too busy watching awe play across his face. He wants to push up my skirt and see me, his fingers twitching at the back of my knees, but he slowly helps me step out of the pantyhose and sets it aside with my shoes. I brush his hair back from his face. Such a good boy, I murmur. Such a patient boy. I am the patient one. lining up all of the pieces for this business trip so that we could find ourselves here, ready, alone. It all had to look accidental, or else he never would have accepted the drink as he practiced his keynote address. Coming to the balcony had to be his idea, the hotel room too stuffy, his mind unable to think, surrounded by all of that terrible generic hotel art. I created this for us, followed my suspicions, and playing my cards until he could be brought to his knees willingly before me. His Adam's apple bobs as he gulps, intoxicated by the scent of my desire for him, my arrogant, predictable, beautiful boss.
Thank you, Ella. Okay, our next reader is Katrina Jackson, who's a college history professor by day and writes romances by weekend when her cats allow. And she writes a lot of them, so I think her cats are pretty open to her typing. She writes high heat, diverse, and queer erotic romances and erotica. She also likes sleep, salt and pepper beards, and sunshine. Katrina.
So I'm reading from After about a woman and her husband on their postpartum sexual journey. And I'll start near the beginning, which I never know where to start. So yeah, you just do what you can. My laughter was a dry wheeze. I was still groggy from sleep and I felt like a dried out corn husk and my silk bonnet was sliding off my head. Beautiful was not the word I would have used to describe myself first thing in the morning. But Damon was looking at me like he used to when we first met, and I let him lure me awake with the familiar seduction in his eyes. His hand slides under the covers, his fingers brush lightly along the bare skin exposed from my tank top, riding up while I slept. His fingertips felt like electricity, and my body seemed to come to life. For a handful of moments, I felt like myself again, like Eva instead of May's mom, a role I was still figuring out. Damon's hand moved across my torso. His fingers rubbed smooth circles over the new stretch marks that had blossomed across my belly and hips like artwork. I didn't hate them. I didn't love them. They just were. But in that moment, I had the strongest urge to watch Damon's lips and tongue trace each striation marking my soft brown skin. I thought I could be convinced to like them if I saw that. His fingers slipped into my pajama pants, caressed my hip, walked around my thigh, and played at the seam of my legs. "This okay?" he whispered to me. We were lying with our heads on our respective pillows, watching each other. The sun was just rising in the sky, filtering through the sheer curtains in our bedroom. "Yes," I whispered back and lifted my left leg, opening myself to him. His fingers moved to my underwear, rubbing up and down the crotch, sometimes circling just over the hood of my clit, sometimes pressing at my opening, teasing touches he knew I loved. There was no urgency, even though we didn't have all the time in the world anymore. May was a good sleeper, but she'd be up in about a half an hour. I could hear her light snores through the baby monitor. I wanted to tell Damon to hurry up, but I trusted him to set the pace and make what little time we had worth it. Eventually, his hand moved to my waist, just under the soft handful of flesh my cousin told me is the hardest to get rid of after a pregnancy. I groaned in anticipation when his hand pushed into my panties, his fingers sifting through the soft curls over my mound and down over my lips. I normally loved his hands on me, but this felt different. I couldn't pinpoint why, so I shifted my hips closer, silently asking him to touch me with just a bit more pressure, and he did. He stroked me from clit to opening and back again, teasing me into full consciousness. Arousal came to life in my stomach, pulsed outward to invigorate all the changed parts of my body, the soft roll of flesh at my waist, larger breasts full of milk, aching nipples, and slightly broader hips. I think that's 2 minutes.
Thank you, Katrina. And I forgot to say that Katrina's Twitter handle is Katrina Jax, Jax. Okay, I'm going to bring up our next reader, Louise Kane, who you can find at louisekanewrites.com. That's Louise, Kane, is a queer erotica writer who lives by the motto, write smut, read smut, live forever. She lives in Seattle, Washington, by way of Chicago, Illinois, with her feline companion, Marge. And Louise's handle is, one moment, Louise_Kane_. Louise.
Thank you. I'm going to start in the middle so we get to the good stuff. The story is called Tracing the Edge, and the premise is my main character, Alex, has been sexting with her partner and has been told to edge every hour on the hour. So we're at like hour 2. 11:04 a.m. Shit. Alex checked the time on her phone in disbelief. She must have missed setting the alarm. Of course, she'd magically make it back in time after the grocery store fiasco, only to completely screw up when all she was doing was watching Netflix. Alex bit her tongue, trying to decide what to do as guilt churned in her stomach. It had to be better to complete her task before confessing her screw up. She'd masturbate now, ask for forgiveness later, and hope her punishment wouldn't be too severe. She jumped into bed, pushing away the guilt nibbling at her edges as she sank into how good it felt to slide her fingers along her clit and dip them into her cunt. Alex pressed harder, dragging pleasure to the surface as she closed her eyes in search of fantasy. Her other hand drifted to her tits, running a finger over each nipple until the sensation grew past the point of comfort. Then she rubbed them some more. Alex imagined herself sitting across from her boss. They were in her boss's office at her desk, but Alex was the one in control, able to make her boss do whatever Alex wanted. Alex made her boss get undressed until all she had on were heels, and then Alex made her crawl, push up Alex's skirt, and lick her until Alex came. When Alex was done, she had her boss call in another coworker, and Alex watched her suck his cock. She had her boss do it again and again, and it fuck. Alex clutched at the sheets like a lifeline, waiting for the pulsing in her cunt to subside. She hadn't been paying enough attention. She'd almost come. After her late start, that would have been the cherry on top. Her stomach clenched at the reminder of what she had to do, and the ache in her pelvis instantly quelled. She sent Bryce a picture and a description and almost stopped there. After all, Bryce hadn't asked what Alex was doing or why she hadn't texted. Bryce didn't know what Alex had done. No, she couldn't shake the need to confess, to ask forgiveness. With stiff fingers, Alex sent one more message. I cheated. What do you mean, pretty girl? Alex pouted. She hated having to tell Bryce she messed up. She should have lied, but even if Bryce wouldn't have known Alex had disobeyed, Alex would have. And no matter the game, Alex wanted to be good, especially when she was the only one keeping herself accountable. Started late, sir. I'm sorry. I lost track of time and I'm sorry. Her cheeks heated with the admission of wrongdoing. She knew Bryce wouldn't actually be mad, but logic didn't stop Alex's brain and body from tensing in anticipation. She hated being bad, hated it worse when she hadn't meant to be. Alex worried her bottom lip, seconds feeling like hours before 3 dots popped onto the screen. Well then, you're such a good girl for telling me, but that doesn't mean this can go unpunished, does it? Alex shook her head, mouth twisted to the side, even though Bryce couldn't see. No, sir. The next time you touch yourself, I want you to wear the nipple clamps. Put them on 5 minutes before you start. Don't take them off until after you've sent me your picture and description. Alex let out a slow breath, a trickle of fear crawling up her spine. The clamps hurt a lot, but Bryce was right. Alex deserved it. It could have been worse. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Louise. Okay, our final reader, and then we're going to have a discussion, is Anuja Vargas, who you can find at anujavargas.com. She's a Canadian writer whose work has appeared in several literary magazines, as well as in the Best Women's Erotica of the Year, Volume 6 anthology. She is currently pursuing creative writing at the University of Toronto and probably reads too much into every fortune cookie she opens. And you can find Anuja on Twitter at Anuja_V.
Hi, thank you. I loved all your stories so much. They're all so good. So I'm going to read from my short story, which is called Multiple Gifts, which is a pretty clear reference there. But the premise here is that my two characters, Ashika and Vic, have this kind of long distance flirtation. And the question comes up, how many times do you think I could make you come? And they have kind of this one night together to find an answer to that question. So I'm going to start kind of in the middle here. Multiple gifts. They brought their drinks into the bedroom and made out like teenagers up against the walls and carelessly against the dresser, kicking aside garters, bras, and thongs as they went. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Ashika reached down to stroke Vic's cock through his briefs, but he caught her hand and brought it to his lips. Let me touch you, she whispered. If I let you do that, this is going to be over much too fast, he said, and we can't have that now, can we? Not when I have, what, 6 more orgasms to go? I have a vibrator you could stick in, Ashika joked. That would probably get you at least 1 more. I think that would be cheating, wouldn't it? No one would know, Ashika replied, leaning in to kiss him again. He accepted her gin-flavored mouth, her tongue, her breath, her spit, all of it. Then he said, all right, get it out. What, my vibrator? He nodded. Ashika paused, then rolled over and pulled the trusty toy out of her bedside table drawer. It wasn't anything fancy, 8 inches of reliable vibrating silicone in the shape of a hot pink cock. She wasn't ashamed to have it, but it was a strange thing to show to someone else, someone who she both knew well and was also meeting for the first time. She held it up for him to see. That's very pretty, he said. Do you ever think about me while you're using it? Ashika laughed, cheeky bastard. Maybe. Come on now, tell the truth. Yes, so many times, yes. He laughed with her, then said, stand up. So she did. Just against the wall there, please. She did as he asked, dildo still in hand. Spread your legs just a little. Is this some private fantasy of yours that we haven't covered? Ashika teased, but she spread her legs apart, just as he said. Maybe, he replied. His eyes on her body as he moved toward her felt every bit as intimate as his hands and his mouth had felt before. Come on now, she echoed him. Tell that yes. He cut her off as he took the toy from her hand and turned it on. I have fantasized about this, about you. He touched the vibrating head lightly to her clit, even when I knew I shouldn't, that this should have ended at friendship, but no matter what I did, he was pressing harder now and the pleasure was spiraling out in waves that kept building in intensity. I couldn't get you out of my mind. Ashika came for him against the wall, the orgasm washing over her like a sheet of warm rain, but he wasn't done. I've had feelings for other women before, Ashika, but this is different. He was so close to her and so real. No oceans, no screens, no walls between them now. Feelings I can manage, but this thing between us, this is a fucking fire. Without warning, he pushed the entire length of the pink cock into her cunt. Then he was fucking her with it, still vibrating with long, deep strokes, driving her towards the edge of an electric release. His face was next to hers, his cheek against her cheek when he said, I've thought about it from every angle, but there's just no way, is there? There's no way to touch a fire without getting burned. He turned to look her in the eyes. So fuck it, he said. Let's burn. Let's burn, Ashika repeated, barely able to get it out before he brought his mouth down on hers and kissed her while she came again.
Thank you. Okay, well, hopefully my first question is not too challenging. It might be, I don't know. But what was the inspiration for each of your stories? The theme of this book is obviously women's orgasms, which I know some people think, oh, well, isn't there orgasm always in erotica? Which not necessarily, but I think I as an editor, I'm always interested in how authors take a theme and really personalize it and make it, just as unique as all the stories we just heard. So whoever wants to jump in on the inspiration for your story.
I can go because I have a pretty clear inspiration to mine. So it came from, if anybody has watched Fleabag, if anyone loves Fleabag and Hot Priest as much as I did, but there is kind of a joke in there, I guess, about sort of this lawyer character being kind of a shit person, but really great at sex. And there's kind of a, how many times was he able to make her come? So that's kind of where that question came from for me for this story.
I love that inspo. I've watched Fleabag season 2 1,000,001 times.
Yes.
My inspiration was COVID inspired in a way, but I'm always very pro sexting, so that would have been happening anyway. But yeah, just I love the intimacy that you can achieve when you're apart, when you're both willing to be vulnerable and put yourselves out there over the phone.
I just want to jump in and say your story, and there's another story called Remote Vibrations, which is, a directly set pretty much during a pandemic-like situation where the characters cannot physically be together. And I'm always really intrigued by how authors can make intimacy happen when people are not in the same physical room. Like that is definitely something I'm always up for reading more about. Anyone else on your inspiration? If you want to pass, it's okay.
I'll go. And first I'll just say, I feel so prude, what I read compared to what all of you read. Oh my goodness.
Well, yeah, but the rest of your story.
I guess, I'll know in the future that I can just get into the dirty stuff. So yeah, for me, my inspiration, I guess it was kind of, maybe, I don't know, cerebral. I was trying to think of, finding, someone else, a different kind of perspective to bring into erotica. And I worked at a retirement home as a waitress when I was growing up. So I just got some, insight into kind of the lives that a lot of people led. And, they were happy and vibrant and, they did it all. Like, so I just, I think that was an inspiration for Rose and like her journey.
Claire, I wanted to say too, I loved your story. I love stories that you don't often see sort of older people depicted in erotic situations. So it's really cool to see that in a story. But it also made me think of my friend saying that her mom is in like a residence for seniors, and she's like, you would not believe the amount of sex they're having in there. Like, so apparently it's happening.
Yeah, I heard that too. Yeah, I heard, some STDs as well, so sex, folks, come on.
Yeah. Well,
I can go next. This is a little darker, but when the Me Too movement happened and the conversation started about sexual harassment and power imbalances, I was thinking a lot about what do workplace relationships look like, and how do you explore that fantasy of seducing your boss in a way that is very aware of power, and how do you write that fantasy in a way that is aware of the conversation that's going on and still is very hot and explicitly consensual. So that was kind of the challenge that I set for myself when I wrote this. And it was really fun and very hard. And I was excited to see some of the reviews that have come in flagging that and saying like, oh, I was nervous, but it worked. So I was like, good, challenge accepted.
I have a really good friend who had 2 relatively difficult pregnancies, but she's a nurse, which meant that at every point in her pregnancy and after, she talked to me about it in incredible detail, in particular about bodies and how they shift. And because she's a nurse, it was all really sort of normalized. And so something she said, I think during her last pregnancy, about just how like stimulation changes and how like even the ability to become aroused can change, especially if you're kind of looking forward to it or nervous about it, like your ability to sort of stand in your own way mentally. And I think I was just kicking that around in my head for a while. And then this is just how it came out.
Thank you, everybody. We have some questions from viewers. So again, feel free to jump in, and if you want to skip it, that's fine. Ramona asked, how do you get yourself in the mood to write passion scenes?
Coffee, I write first thing in the morning. I don't really care what it is.
It's very real. I when I first started writing erotica, and still sometimes now when I'm out of practice, I will go to a bar and have a cocktail by myself, and I find that that helps me kind of loosen up the awkwardness that can happen when you're writing something really graphic. And certainly, I think for beginners, that's often my advice: is like, whether or not it's alcohol or a substance, like find a way to get yourself to relax, and break through that part of yourself that kind of censors your brain while you're writing. Yeah.
I have a piggyback on that, which is sometimes, I mean, I've written a lot of erotic under my name. I've written some under other names, and sometimes I just write another name, like a pseudonym at the top of the page, because it just is easier to like jump into whatever I'm going to write, because it's not me writing it, it's this other person. And sometimes that just helps when the writing is not like instantly flowing.
I take that relaxation tip a little bit further, and I usually will play it out in my head while I'm masturbating so that I know, like, but really, like, that way when I come to the page, like, I already know a lot of the big points that I want to hit in the story. And so, like, that to me is how I'm actually able to write stories, when I already kind of have a map to follow. Because if I'm staring at a blank page, yeah, it's close to impossible to start, especially with erotica.
So there's, if anyone else wants to answer that, you can, but there's another question that somewhat relates to what was just discussed. Morgan asked, what were some of your first drafts like? Do you think of a sex scene and then build around it, or the other way around? And you can all answer about your stories in this book or any other writing you've done. I mean, I'll go on that one. I've only written short stories. I haven't really written longer work. So usually I'll get the idea for most of the story at once. I mean, I don't know every detail before I sit down, but I do generally know the arc. And most of the time, the sex scene or scenes are sort of built into the story. Once in a while I have written where I start with the sex scene and I build out, but often, like, I have trouble that way because I don't know enough about what's happening. So I tend to write in chronological order, but sometimes I will start sort of in the middle of the story and come back to an earlier part. But I guess the way my mind works, I tend to just think of either the general premise or what's going to happen. And if I don't write it down pretty quickly, like, I lose it in my head. So
I think for me, I usually start with a character or two characters or three characters or whatever that main connection is in the story. And there's usually some idea there, some spark between these two or more people, some particular thing that I know that these characters really want to explore. And then the story and the sex scenes usually come out of that.
Yeah, I very rarely start with the sex scene. Usually there's some kind of moment or interaction that is the spark that gets me writing, and that tends to be where I'll start. In this case, I had an interaction at work with someone who complimented my earrings, and for me that was like, I don't know what it was. I think it was somebody who hadn't ever given me a compliment before, let alone on my appearance, and it was like this interesting kind of, like, I don't know why, it just stuck in my brain, and that wound up being what I started with. And then I kind of built outward of, well, who are these characters? Why was this kind of a moment that stood out to them? And then the setting kind of unfolded too after that.
Yeah, super similar for me. It's usually I take like a weekly walk through this like forested park by my place, and then falling asleep, I'll usually dialogue, like a snip of dialogue or action will just appear, and always write it down, because you think you will remember it and you will never fucking remember. Sorry, you'll never remember it. But I usually start there in like a phone note, and then it expands from there. And it's usually like a romantic piece of it. A lot of the sex I write is between like partners or people who love each other, and then it just expands from there.
For me, a lot of it's just daydreaming. But I guess similar to Louise, I tend to map out as much of the story as I can in my head and then just try and write it out all in one go because I lose momentum and, I lose my creative energy. So, I try and just power through it and then, see what it looks like at the end. And then I try not to edit because the short stories, I try not to edit them too much, just because I can overthink things. So yeah, that's it's kind of random, at least at the moment. I'm not as disciplined as I think I'd like to be.
We have a bunch of questions coming in, and if anyone wants to jump back to something we were discussing, feel free to jump in. But Monica asked, is it easier to write a short story versus something longer? I don't know if anyone wants to chime in on why. I see lots of nodding heads.
I've been working on my first novel, and I want to die on most days while I work on it. It is much easier to write short fiction, at least in my experience. I feel like that's a common opinion.
Yeah,
I mean-
I'm in the exact same boat. I'm also working on a first novel, and like my instinct is like, and story over. No, wait, there's still like 70,000 more words of this. Like, it's a completely different beast to take on. So yes, it's, for me anyway, it's much easier to have that contained frame of a short story rather than the beast of writing a novel.
Yeah, I am on my second novel manuscript, but like speaking to that, COVID obliterated my ability to work on a novel, like a longer form piece. And that's actually a huge reason why Erotica became such a big outlet for me, because it's done like in a week versus just months to a years, yeah. And also writing is just lonely, and you get such quicker satisfaction when you're writing short stories, because then people get to be like, oh, you know how to do this, instead of like the lonely slog of a novel where every day you're like, I don't know how to do this, and nobody can convince me otherwise.
I guess I'm not in the same boat as everyone. I do prefer short stories, mostly because I don't like a plot. Like, I mean, there's nothing I hate more than a novel, and it's like they have to do things now. They have to like grow and change or something. I don't care. But I do think, for instance, like a short erotic story, I used to very much prefer over anything else. But I think actually at this point, my sort of like comfort zone is like a short erotic novella as opposed to a novel, because at the erotic novel point, the demands of a plot are just a little too much. And so that's where the time goes. But I also think it really kind of depends on the project. Some novels have been really easy to write for me, easier than some short stories that I have like agonized over and revise, and at some point just realize I'm not going to make this sort of work. And then some novels feel like the words just sort of pour out of my fingers, and they're just a joy to write. So it just kind of depends.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that? Do you always know in advance what it's going to be? Like if it's going to be a novella or a novel, or does that sometimes, do you find out while you're writing, or do you ever start a short story and then you're like, wait, this wants to be a novella?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I just launched my Patreon today, and the goal was to have a short story. I had a strict 5,000 word goal, and then at 1,000 words, I was like, well, maybe, okay, I can like bump it up to like, 6,000. And then finally, I was like, okay, so the first part of what is going to be a novella was 15K, but those 15K were super easy to write. So at some point, I just gave up. There are some things, like if it's in a series, obviously like this is going to be a novel and there's like an interconnected plot, which kind of pulls me along. But at this point, I just don't even pretend to know what a story is going to be before I start, because I'm not, you all seem great at planning. I'm not, and I just sort of let it happen. And if it grows, it grows. That's okay.
We have another question about writing. Does it get very mechanical when writing such scenes, when you have to focus on the words and on making sense besides invoking steamy feelings? And that was Nita's question.
I think for me, that is what second drafts and third and fourth and fifth drafts are for. Like for me, the first draft is a lot of feeling, and I usually know kind of what kind of acts I want to pull into it. Like, is there going to be oral? Is there going to be impact, etc.? So I kind of know those pieces, but I'm not super mechanical about it. And then it's the second and third drafts where I'm like, did I use the word hand 10 times in the same paragraph? Do not be afraid to do a find for the common words. I do that in all of my stories before I hit submit.
I find it's sort of less technical if I have a story where it's, you know, two people, then I'm more focused on sort of the connection or what's happening between them. Whereas if I'm writing a story that involves more than two people, then I kind of have to go, okay, so where was everybody's bits and pieces in this scene? And yeah, so I think that it can get a little more technical, but it's always a secondary consideration, I think, to what, like, the feeling you're trying to get across in that moment.
I know people who use like dolls to try and like make sure that they're keeping track of all the limbs and stuff.
I love that. I actually was going to ask for whether for this piece or any other pieces you've written, have you done any interesting research? I mean, do you do research, like whether it's talking to someone you know or reading or watching things? Or
Yeah, I do research, usually not on the thing I think I should be researching, but this piece was probably the only time where like what I was writing about and the research match, because I don't have kids, haven't had babies, don't really know. And my oversharing friend gave me information, but not quite like what else I needed to know. So I would read a few articles about like postpartum sensation and all of that.
Yeah, I do research too. Yeah, usually when I'm writing, you know, I just want to try and make sure that what's in my head actually, you know, there's like, you know, if I Google something, the same results come up and everything makes sense. And then, you know, I watched a ton of porn to do like all of the, you know, sex scenes and all of that, you know, just really studying. I didn't take notes. I stopped myself there. But yeah, so like doing visual stuff, and then you reading, and, you know, there are lots of like illustrations and things you can look at online these days. So always have my eye open for new things to try. And I'm a really imaginative person, so I can imagine the same thing over and over and over again until, you know, it's, you know, kind of like all, I can see it from a lot of different perspectives. So yes, research is fun. It can be distracting for me at least.
this is a little bit of a kind of throwback question I maybe should have started with, but how did all of you get into writing erotica?
I can go. I got into it just by reading and then writing fanfic. That was kind of my gateway drug. AO3, when I started, you know, when you see sort of so I know it gets a bad rap, but some of the work that you see people putting out there in these fandoms is so good and so hot. And it was just such an inspiration. And then I eventually, and I think it's a really supportive community too, or it can be. So that was really what inspired me to start creating my own work as well.
Can I be nosy and ask what fan fiction of what kind of fan fiction you were writing about?
Oh, like what fandoms
Yeah.
am I part of? So this was during the height of Game of Thrones. So there is a lot of GOT fanfic that's out there by me if you're on AO3. I'm Midtown Kitten. You can look it up. But yeah, so like a lot of fantasy-based stuff. I have some Witcher stuff up there. I have some Viking stuff up there. So, and I also just kind of browsed. Really, that's the beauty of it. I think that you can find just about anything that that you are interested in.
I also got my start in fan fiction.
Yes.
Yeah, I started reading fan fiction when I was a teenager. I was a big Harry Potter fan fiction person, but like Gossip Girl, Heroes, like the shows that were on at the time. And for me, like I don't think I realized erotica. I don't think I read erotica properly until I was in college. And I happened to go to a Good Vibrations while I was on a trip to San Francisco and found a copy of the Best Women's Erotica series and bought it. And that kind of blew up my world a little bit. And from there, I wound up interning at Cleus Press, which is how I met Rachel. And yeah, as like a little baby. And now it's really fun to be like, I'm in the books.
Oh, that's so nice.
But yeah, no, fan fiction is such like an interesting gateway, I think, for a lot of folks, because erotica can sound very intimidating as a reader. And fan fiction is it's characters you know and you're familiar with. And so the sexual content feels less jarring, I think, and maybe a little less illicit. And then it makes it a lot easier to make the jump to erotica because you're familiar with writing that is sensual and that is often focused on the pleasure of women and queer people, because fan fiction is so often written by us. But yeah, go fanfic, no shame.
Yeah. And to fill the gaps, right? That they're not showing you in the shows or in the books. So yeah.
Or to get Brienne and Jaime the ending they deserve in Game of Thrones, but that's a different.
I love this. I am like mostly just, I grew up reading fanfic and like very illicit fanfic. No part of me thought it wasn't. I was like, lemons or die. Thank you. But I never wrote fanfic. And then I just like randomly, again, COVID was kind of happening, started doing it, and or it was a little bit beforehand. And a friend of mine convinced me to read at an open mic that I go to every month. And it went over very well. Open mics love erotica, unsurprisingly, a little bit more than a YA novel, which is usually what I was reading. And yeah, and then I happened to like meet my current girlfriend at that open mic, and we started exchanging writing and erotica. So if you need anything to kickstart your erotica writing career, fall in love with somebody who you woo through that. Mm-hmm.
Am I also, once again, like I started writing erotica with fanfic, but I read it as a kid. Like I was the kid in the library who was, you know, checking out Anne Rice's erotica under A. and Roquelaire, and it should not have been, but I read the entire series and I was deeply scarred. And then I just kept reading. I just loved it. Yeah, I also was, as a teenager, very unfortunately into like slam poetry and open mics. And so wrote a lot of erotic poetry. I mean, just deeply, deeply embarrassing. But I've always loved erotica, I guess.
Claire, do you want to go?
Sure. For me, so my best friend and I in high school, we were like obsessed with this one British band named McFly, and listening to the music now. Sorry, I'm on an exercise ball, so I'm kind of going all over the place. But listening to their music now, you know, it's sort of like, really, like that band? But you know, we just love them. And after school, we would message like our fantasies to each other through AIM, you know, like instant messaging, and we just do it for hours. We'd have like story time. So that's kind of just how it started. Like she was the enabler for like my dirty imagination, and you know, eventually it just kind of came out again and started writing. And you know, just can't stop now. It's too fun.
Awesome. I was sitting here like, I didn't know what fan fiction was in high school or probably college. I've never really been involved with it, but the first erotica story I wrote in 1999 was, I guess you would call it fan fiction, maybe, I don't know. It was in a book called Starfucker, and it was about Monica Lewinsky, and it was called Monica and Me. And I did do research, like I researched the name of her lipstick that she wore in her Barbara Walters interview, because that lipstick is used in the story in a very intimate way. And yeah, so yeah, I guess that was my kind of introduction to sexy celebrity stories.
If there was a contest, I think you won, Rachel. Like that was wild.
Well, that story has its own life of its own, because I wound up meeting someone I dated because she had read the story, and I had a crush on Monica and she had a crush on Monica. So that story kind of took on a little life of its own. But so Angela asked, how do you feel about family and friends reading your erotica? I can go, I guess. Friends, I have no problem with that. Family, you know, I don't use a pseudonym, so, you know, pretty much my whole family knows I write erotica. I haven't like had an explicit conversation with all of them about it, but, you know, a lot of them follow me on social media, or they just know me. I mean, I don't sit around at family parties talking about my books, but my family, I'm really lucky. They were very supportive, but I know that for a lot of people, you know, not just friends, family, but bosses, coworkers, neighbors. I mean, it is an issue where even when they do use a pseudonym, they have to be very careful, because if the wrong person were to find out that they wrote this, I mean, we still live in a very judgmental society in a lot of places, and you know, it would cause problems for a lot of people. So when I talk to people about what name they're going to use, I always tell them, like, make sure it's a name, if you're going to pick a pseudonym, that cannot be traced back to you. Like, don't use the nickname that you use with a ton of other people, if someone finding out would have like major consequences, or even if it wouldn't, but it would impede your creativity, like we were talking about before. I think whatever will make it easier for you to write erotica, not make it more challenging for you, is what you should do, because you can always claim your pseudonym later. You can't really hide it once. If you've used your name, I mean, it's probably going to be somewhere online, and you can't kind of stop. I mean, you could stop using it, but that name will still be out there. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I also write under my real name. People know that I do it. Again, like, I don't think, you know, for instance, I have a lot of family on Facebook, whereas less family on Twitter and Instagram and things like that. So I tend to post less about, you know, sucking cock on Facebook versus, you know, if I have a story in a book about women's orgasms, it's probably going to be on Twitter and Instagram. So my friends certainly know and are very supportive. And I'm fortunate to work in my day job at a YWCA, which is sort of a really progressive and feminist place to work. And they're also really supportive of my creative work. So yeah, that's kind of where I am with that.
I also write under my real name, and my parents mercifully are very supportive. They don't read my erotica, but they are not embarrassed. And I'm actually in my childhood bedroom at my mom's right now. So I had a fun moment of like, this is a little okay. But yeah, the larger problem that I've had has been, I don't regret writing under my own name. I'm very proud of the work that I do. The one thing I didn't really foresee was parents of significant others and how they might react. Because I don't want to date someone who's not cool with the writing that I do, but often their parents are kind of like, oh, okay, at least before they get to meet me and they realize it's just one part of what I do. And actually, I wrote my undergraduate thesis about feminist erotica. And I had like, it's an academic thesis with like a creative element. And I was working on it over spring break at my boyfriend at the time's parents' house. And I was being very discreet. But once we got back to campus, his mom called him and was like, so Ella left a page of her thesis behind by accident in the guest room. And like, there was a terrifying moment where we were both like, is this over? Like, is this about to go really south? And thankfully she was just like, I wish she'd talk to us about it. I thought she was a little boring. Because I'd been hiding so much of what I actually do. So that was a teachable moment for me. But yeah, I'm a fun Google already because I write about sexual health. So I feel like erotica is actually like the least controversial part of what I do. I write a lot about STIs and herpes. So I feel like if people are not cool with that, erotica is kind of like, it's all part of the same thing. So yeah.
I use a pen name, but actually I only use it because I write young adult fiction and it's not great to but like my parents know I write erotica, my coworkers know I write erotica. Like I don't tell them my pen name because I don't want my mom to read it, and I think that she would actually Google it and try to read it if she could. And I'm not interested in that piece of it. But yeah, I'm also very lucky that I'm very unapologetically like queer and in your face about it. So I wouldn't probably have people in my life who would be weird about erotica, but yeah.
I write under a pen name, but that's primarily because I teach at a university, and there is nothing I want less than my students to Google me, which is very common. They do so every semester. I want them to see my bad student evaluations, and that is it. But in terms of like my family and friends, I'm actually just I'm particularly quiet about everything. So, I'm the kind of person who will just sort of move, when I moved to Ohio for where I live, when I moved here for school, I just kind of moved here for school. And then some of my friends were like, hey, what are you doing this weekend? And I was like, oh, I live in a different state now. See you when I come home. Or like, I don't like a lot of attention generally. So a friend of mine, though, recently did just figure out my pen name, and she texted me and said, hey, what's your pen name? I want to buy some of your books for a vacation. And the very next message before I could say no was, oh, never mind, I got it. So, and then she sent me really nice messages. So generally speaking, I don't really care, but I'm less likely to talk about myself, period.
Yeah, I also use a pen name. Share it with my friends. They're fine with it. Figure if they don't like it, then maybe they shouldn't be my friend. So, it's like just, part of who I am. I like to keep it separate from my family, just kind of partly for like a peace of mind kind of thing, like if they knew my name, they could read it if they wanted to. And I don't, that's kind of a creative hindrance, I think. So, and also my real name is very unique. So it would be difficult to try and like separate anything on the internet. Like I couldn't hide amongst other names. And it's long and like weird anyway. So like not very, I don't think kind of friendly for kind of like author names. So yeah, going with the pen name, and it's working. So
Katrina, well, you know what? I'll ask you in the chat.
Oh wait, Rachel, you muted yourself.
I did mute myself. I was trying to ask the question. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I hope if these stories are intrigued you enough to want to read all of the rest of them, and then the other 15 stories in the book. There's a story called House of Fingers, which is one of my favorite story titles that I've ever published. I hope you'll buy it from Love Sweet Arrow, and you can get any books you would like from Love Sweet Arrow, including Katrina's and the Best Women's Erotica of the Year series that I edit, which several of our authors, Katrina, Ella, Anuja, have been published in. Oh, and I wanted to give Katrina a shout out because she also writes under the name Brandy Bush, which those are more explicit than Katrina.
Yeah, those, kind of no. Those are like, my friends joke that that name is like Brandy's Bush, which I cannot not tell anyone. It's hilarious. But those are novella length projects that are sort of like a very tiny bit taboo. So the first novella is called The Roommate. It's about a woman who wants to fuck her roommate's parents and does, you know, live your dreams. And then the second is about a woman, it's called The Nanny, and a woman who has many different sort of turmoils in her life, and her fix for that is to let her husbands breed her because it is sort of light breeder kink. So it's like sort of light, kind of kinky, taboo stuff.
Awesome. Okay, so what are you all working on next within the erotica sexy writing genre, if any?
Yeah, I can go. I am, as I mentioned, I'm working on my first novel, which is a romance that is about a bunch of millennials who go back for their college reunion. And yeah, and they're all very messy and kind of like 5 years later, the world is terrible. But it definitely has a lot of erotic elements. And then I also I write on Patreon, and I write about casual sex. And I have a blend of erotica and personal essays that are spicy. So that's what I'm working on.
Like I said, I just launched my Patreon, and I'm on August 1st launching the first part of a novella, not a short story, called Looking, about a married couple dating a new girl. And then I'm also working on certainly at least two stories right now. One is the second book in my Heist Holidays series, which is a MMF heist erotica, and then the second novel in the Mafia series called The Family. Well, the book is called The Enforcer. Look, whatever, it's fine.
Claire, Louise, Anuja?
I'll go. So I'm writing just like kind of casual short stories, flash fiction. I post them for free on Wattpad. So post what I can. You can read when you can, 5-10 minutes if you want to, like, get a little hot and bothered, take a break from work or whatever, then the story is available for you. Yeah, always trying to figure out like the first novel. So nothing right now.
Yeah, I'm working on a first novel draft as well. Just sort of like queer D&D campaign meets Bollywood epic. But so it's not really erotica, but a whole lot of sex in there for sure. So, and then also just, always have some kind of fanfic on the back burner, just for fun as well.
Yeah, I am trucking away on first draft of my current novel that I'm working on. And also there was a horrific heat wave in Seattle, and the only good thing to come out of it was a new erotica story idea. So I'm about 1,500 words into that. It's fun.
Awesome. Okay, well, I will tell you all, I am editing Best Women's Erotica of the Year, Volume 8, and the theme is play. So I like to have a theme that's kind of short and snappy, but could pretty much encompass almost anything, depending on what comes in. And it was actually inspired by some of the submissions that came in from Volume 7, which I can't tell you what they are because nothing's finalized yet, but they're very playful and very fun. So if you want those guidelines, go to bweoftheyear.com and click on call for submissions. Yeah, so thank you. I hope you will get coming soon and support Love Sweet Arrow. Thank you, Love Sweet Arrow, for having us. And thank you to all of you wonderful authors and to everyone watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. This was so fun.
you.
Yay.
Bye.